I had always prided myself on being a dedicated and hard-working employee. I wasn't the loudest in the room, but I was always the one who delivered results. I knew my value. Over the years, I had built a solid reputation at the company, gaining the trust of my colleagues and superiors alike. I had worked my way up, earning promotions and recognition for my hard work. Life was going well, and I thought I had earned my place. But one fateful morning, that all came crashing down. I walked into the office that day just like any other. It was a Monday, and I had a few important projects lined up. I was feeling good about the progress I had made, but little did I know, something was brewing behind the scenes. I had just wrapped up a meeting with a client when I was called into my manager's office. Jason, the head of our department, was sitting behind his desk, his face expressionless. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a routine check-in. But the moment he spoke, I could tell something was off. "I'm afraid we have to let you go," Jason said flatly, avoiding eye contact. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Let me go?" The words didn't make sense. I had done nothing wrong. In fact, I had exceeded expectations on every project, always delivered on time, and had even secured some of our largest clients. I was the backbone of the team, always putting in extra hours, always going above and beyond. "I don't understand," I said, trying to remain calm. "What's going on? I've been here for 5 years. I've always given my best." Jason sighed, shifting in his seat. He handed me a folder with a severance package and some paperwork, but there was no explanation, no reason for the dismissal. "It's just business," he said. "This decision has been made, and it's final." I was stunned. Just business? It didn't make sense. We had worked together for so long, and Jason had never shown any signs of dissatisfaction with my work. In fact, just the week before, he had praised me for closing a deal that had brought in record profits for the company. It felt like a punch to the gut. The realization that I was being cast aside without any warning or reason felt like betrayal. There was no warning. No performance issues. Just a decision that felt completely out of nowhere. As I left his office, holding the severance package in my hand, I felt like I was in a haze. The reality of being fired without explanation hadn't fully set in. I walked back to my desk, packed up my things, and tried to maintain composure. But inside, I was boiling with confusion, anger, and a deep sense of injustice. But little did they know, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something bigger than any of them could have imagined. I walked out of the office that day feeling completely defeated, but also determined. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the start of a journey where I would rebuild my career on my own terms. It would take time, but I knew one thing for sure, I was going to make them regret this decision. After the shock of losing my job, I spent the first few days in a daze. I wasn't sure what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Disbelief? It was all there, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I had built a reputation over the last 5 years, and I wasn't going to let a decision made in a boardroom destroy everything I had worked for. The first thing I did was take some time for myself. I needed to clear my mind and process the events that had unfolded. I spent a few days just thinking and planning. I couldn't control what had happened, but I could control how I reacted. I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let this be the end of my career. I reached out to my network, making phone calls and sending emails to former colleagues, mentors, and clients. The support I received was overwhelming. Everyone I had worked with over the years was shocked by the news. They all agreed that the decision to fire me was unjustified and that they valued my work. In fact, within days, I had multiple job offers from different companies. It was humbling, and it showed me that I was respected in my field. But while the offers were tempting, I had something bigger in mind. I didn't want to jump into another job that might stifle my potential. I didn't want to work for someone else anymore. I had always dreamed of starting my own company, but I had never had the courage to take the leap. Now was my chance. So, I did it. I started my own business, a consulting firm focused on helping companies improve their operations, streamline their processes, and maximize their profits. I knew the industry inside and out, and I had the experience to back it up. The early days were tough. I had no team, no resources, and no steady income. It was a huge risk, but I believed in myself, and I was willing to put in the work. I worked late into the night, building my website, networking with potential clients, and learning everything I could about running a business. I remember my first client meeting. I was nervous, but I knew I had to impress them. I was offering a service that could transform their business, and I had to make sure they knew I was the right person to help them achieve their goals. When the meeting ended, I had signed my first contract. I remember walking out of that room feeling like I had just conquered the world. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had taken control of my future. Over the next few months, my business slowly started to grow. Word spread about the value I brought to my clients, and soon, I was getting more business than I could handle. I hired a small team of talented individuals who shared my vision and my drive. My clients were seeing results, and they were coming back for more. My company was thriving, and I felt more fulfilled than I ever had before. I had finally stepped into my own. But even as I celebrated my success, I couldn't forget what had happened at my old job. I wasn't going to let Jason and the company that fired me off the hook. I knew I was building something incredible, but I couldn't help but think about the injustice of what had happened. I hadn't forgotten what they had done to me. And soon, they would see that they had made a huge mistake. The best revenge? Success. Success doesn't come easily. While the first few months of my new business were filled with excitement and a growing sense of accomplishment, I knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But every success, no matter how small, only fueled my determination. I wasn't just building a business, I was building my revenge. My company had been thriving, and the word was getting out. I had quickly established a reputation for delivering results, and clients were referring me to others. The foundation I was laying wasn't just about money or status, it was about proving that I was capable of achieving success without the corporate structure that had once confined me. I wasn't going to let my former employer's betrayal define me. Months passed, and things started to pick up steam. I secured a few large contracts, expanded my team, and got the attention of some powerful investors. The offers and recognition kept rolling in, and I was on top of the world. I knew that I was doing something that mattered, something that no one could take away from me. Then, one afternoon, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was Jason, the same manager who had fired me with no explanation. I recognized his voice immediately, and I could hear the uneasiness in his tone. "Hey, I know this might sound strange, but I wanted to reach out," he began, sounding awkward. "I wanted to know if you'd be willing to take on a consulting project for our company. We need help restructuring some of our operations, and I know you're the best at this." For a moment, I was speechless. Jason, the man who had tossed me aside like an outdated spreadsheet, was now asking for my help? My first instinct was to hang up the phone and let him stew in his own mess. But then, something inside me told me to listen, to hear him out. This was my chance, my opportunity to turn the tables. I kept my cool, not letting my emotions get the better of me. I knew this was more than just a business opportunity. This was my moment of reckoning. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. Jason continued, explaining the company's struggles and how they had failed to keep up with their competitors. He admitted that their operations were in disarray, and they needed someone with experience to guide them through the turmoil. He mentioned that they had been struggling for months, and now, they were desperate. "We've tried everything," Jason said, almost pleading. "I know this might sound odd coming from me, but I really think you're the only one who can help us." I could feel the power shift in that moment. The man who had fired me was now at my mercy. He had lost everything he thought he had built, and now, he needed me to clean up the mess he had made. I could have said no, walked away from it all, and left him to deal with the consequences. But this wasn't just about vengeance. It was about asserting my power. It was about showing him that I was in control now. "I'll consider it," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But I need to think about it. I'll get back to you in a couple of days." The phone call ended, and I sat there for a while, contemplating my next move. I wasn't sure what I wanted out of this. I wasn't looking for closure, but I realized that this was a chance to put the final nail in the coffin for Jason and the company that had wronged me. I had already proven myself. I had already surpassed their expectations, built something better, and created my own future. But now, I had the chance to rewrite the final chapter. And I wasn't about to waste it. The decision lingered in my mind for a few days. Should I help Jason and his failing company? Should I show them mercy, or should I seize this opportunity to further cement my success? It wasn't a question of whether I could help them, I knew I could. The question was whether it was worth my time. I was at a crossroads. My company was thriving, and I had more clients than I could handle. I had just hired a few new team members and was preparing to expand even further. Everything I had worked for was coming together perfectly. I didn't need to go back into that world, especially after the way they treated me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Not just for the business potential, but for the sweet retribution it offered. Jason, the man who had once deemed me unworthy of my job, was now asking for my help. He needed me to rescue his company, a company that had, in essence, failed without me. So, I made the call. I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at a restaurant downtown. I arrived a few minutes early, as always, and took a seat at a quiet table in the corner. I had a clear plan in mind. I would take on this project, but I would do it on my own terms. When Jason walked in, I couldn't help but notice how different he looked. The man who had once been confident and unapproachable now seemed worn down, his posture slouched, his eyes tired. His power, the power he once had over me, was gone. And in its place was a man who had lost everything, now dependent on someone he had discarded. He sat down across from me, the tension palpable. He cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable, but I didn't say a word. I let the silence hang in the air, enjoying the moment. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, his voice a little shaky. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I understand that I'm asking for a lot. But I need your expertise, and I need your help to turn things around." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle. The old me would have been eager to help, desperate for approval and the chance to prove myself. But now, I was different. I didn't need his approval. I needed control. "Here's the thing, Jason," I said slowly, my voice firm and confident. "I don't need to help you. I've built my own empire from scratch, and I don't owe you anything. But I will consider your request on one condition: you give me full control of the project. I don't want to just advise you, I want to run things. And if I'm going to do this, it will be on my terms." Jason looked taken aback, but he didn't hesitate long. He knew he had no choice. His company was hanging by a thread, and if he didn't bring in someone who could fix it, it would all collapse. I was his last hope, and he knew it. "Okay," he said, his voice small. "Whatever you need. I'll follow your lead." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the power shift in that moment. I wasn't just helping them. I was going to take charge. "Good. We start tomorrow," I said, standing up to leave. "I'll send you the initial plan. Don't worry. I'll fix your mess, but don't think for a second that this means we're friends." As I walked out of the restaurant, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. This was no longer about fixing a company or doing charity work. This was about taking control of a situation that had been forced upon me. I had the chance to turn the tables completely. And I was going to enjoy every moment of it. The following days were intense. I dove into the company's operations, analyzing every mistake they had made, every opportunity they had missed. It wasn't long before I realized how deeply mismanaged everything was. The team was disengaged, the morale was low, and their systems were outdated. It was a mess, and I was the only one who could clean it up. But I was determined. I wasn't just going to fix the problems, I was going to make them regret firing me. They were about to see just how capable I really was. The first few days were a whirlwind. I quickly realized that I wasn't just coming into the company as an outside consultant, I was coming in as the new leader. The power had shifted, and I had to embrace it. As I assessed the company's situation, I saw the full extent of the damage. I couldn't believe that Jason had let things deteriorate so badly. It was clear that his lack of leadership and his inability to make tough decisions had led the company to this point. The team was scattered, disillusioned, and utterly disconnected from the company's mission. They had no direction, no sense of purpose. And that was where I came in. I spent the first week meeting with each department, understanding the pain points, the inefficiencies, and most importantly, the lack of respect for the leadership. It wasn't just about business operations anymore, it was about rebuilding trust. I started by having a few open meetings with the employees, talking to them about the company's vision and where I saw it going. I told them, bluntly, that the old way of doing things was over. They had lost trust in leadership, and I was there to earn it back, not with empty promises, but with results. The following days, I worked tirelessly to implement changes. I streamlined processes, redefined roles, and most importantly, I put the right people in the right positions. It wasn't enough to just fix the operational issues, I had to rebuild the company culture. And that meant making some tough decisions. One of the first actions I took was firing a few managers who had been part of the company's mismanagement. It wasn't personal, it was just necessary. I couldn't afford to have people in leadership positions who lacked vision or the ability to adapt to change. They were the same people who had failed to recognize the value of the employees beneath them. Jason, who had been more of a figurehead than a real leader, didn't question me. He knew he was in no position to challenge me. I had taken the reins, and it was clear to everyone in the company that I was in charge. I then started working closely with the key departments to identify opportunities for quick wins. In business, success is built on small victories that add up to something bigger. I knew that if I could make an impact early on, the team would start to believe in the new direction. The results were immediate. Within weeks, productivity increased, and employees began to show signs of renewed energy and engagement. But it wasn't just about fixing the internal issues. I knew that if I wanted to truly make an impact, I had to go after the bigger picture. I began restructuring the company's client base, reaching out to old clients who had been lost during the mismanagement. I started forming new relationships with partners and securing projects that would boost the company's reputation. In a matter of months, the company was no longer struggling. It was thriving. We had regained old clients and brought in new ones. The staff morale was higher than ever, and people began to recognize that the changes I had implemented were not just temporary fixes, they were transformations that had set the company on a new path. By now, Jason was no longer a part of the daily operations. He had stepped back, and I had fully taken over. There were no more excuses. There was no more just business. He had tried to get by on charm and good looks. I, on the other hand, had put in the hard work, and now the results spoke for themselves. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that, while things were looking better now, the final chapter had yet to be written. The ultimate revenge wasn't just about fixing the company. It was about making sure that the people who had wronged me would see how far I had come, and how much better off the company was without them. Months had passed since I had taken full control of the company. Things were going better than I could have imagined. We had expanded, rebranded, and were now one of the most sought-after firms in the industry. But as the company grew, I realized that my next move was inevitable. I had built everything from the ground up, but now it was time to make my mark on the industry in a way I never had before. I had outgrown this company, it was no longer a personal victory. It was time to conquer. But the question remained, what about Jason? Despite everything that had happened, despite the hurt he caused me, there was something that kept nagging at the back of my mind. I wasn't done with him. There was something satisfying about watching him struggle as I rose, but it wasn't enough. I needed to make sure that his entire world, the world he had once dismissed me from, was a constant reminder of the mistake he made. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from Jason. It had been months since we'd spoken directly, and I had assumed that he had given up trying to reach out. But here he was, calling me as if nothing had happened. "I need your help," Jason said, his voice filled with tension. "I've tried everything, and my company is failing. I don't know who else to turn to." For a moment, I didn't know how to react. My first instinct was to laugh, to mock him, to tell him that he had lost everything and that this was the result of his own choices. But then, something in me shifted. I wasn't the same man I had been when he fired me. I had risen above his betrayal, and now, I was the one who was in control. "Why should I help you?" I asked calmly, a part of me trying to decide whether or not this was worth my time. "You didn't hesitate to get rid of me when it was convenient. You burned that bridge." I could hear him pause, almost as if he was caught off guard by my response. He had expected me to come running. He had expected me to be the same person he could manipulate into helping him. I know. And I was wrong. I regret it. I see now that I should have never let you go. I made a huge mistake, and now my company is crumbling. You're the only one I trust to fix it, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The humility in his tone was almost laughable. This was the same man who had once belittled me, made me feel insignificant, and thrown me aside as if I was nothing. Now, he was groveling at my feet. But here's the thing, I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already won. I could have turned my back on him, told him to find someone else, and walked away, but I knew that this was a moment of power, a moment where I could decide his fate. I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. He had to know that I was in control now. "I'll help you," I said slowly, weighing my words. "But I'm not doing it out of kindness. I'm doing it because I want to show you what happens when you take someone for granted. I want to show you how easy it is to lose everything, just like you almost did with me." Jason hesitated, then finally spoke, sounding a bit more hopeful. "Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes." I smiled to myself, knowing this wasn't about saving him anymore. It was about showing him what real power looked like. I was no longer the man who had been fired. I was the man who was now the one in charge. I took on the challenge. I walked into the company with a sense of purpose, knowing that I was about to show everyone, including Jason, what true leadership looked like. But more than that, I was going to remind Jason that I was the one who was indispensable, not him. As I began to restructure the company, I realized that the process wasn't just about fixing operations. It was about making sure they knew I was the one who had saved them. It wasn't enough to help him, it was about taking the credit for everything that was about to change. Jason had wanted to ruin me, but in the end, I was the one who had turned the tables. And now, he would be forced to watch as I reshaped everything he had built, all while knowing that he had to rely on me to stay afloat. As the weeks passed, I could feel the power dynamics shift more and more in my favor. I had become the undisputed leader of the company, and not just by position, but by sheer influence. Employees who had once questioned me now looked up to me. I was no longer the person who had been cast aside, I was the person everyone relied on. Jason, on the other hand, was barely hanging on. It was clear that his leadership was no longer respected. He had tried to hold on to his title, but it was no use. He didn't have the vision or the work ethic that I brought to the table. The company was beginning to thrive, but it was only because I had stepped in to take the reins. One afternoon, as I sat in my office overseeing the new strategy one had implemented, I received an unexpected knock on the door. It was Jason. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his hands clenched at his sides. I could tell he was struggling with something, probably his pride. But this time, there was no bravado. No deflection. He looked like a man who had realized the reality of his situation. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice strained. "I know I'm not cut out for this anymore. You've turned everything around. I can't keep pretending like I'm in charge when I know you're the one who's really running things." I looked at him for a long moment, trying to gauge where his head was at. I didn't need him to admit the obvious. I already knew. But hearing him say it aloud felt like the final confirmation of my success. I had taken the company from the brink of failure, and now, it was thriving. "So, what do you want to do?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. For a moment, Jason stood there, lost in thought. His eyes flickered with a mixture of regret and something else, perhaps fear. It wasn't the confident, assured Jason that I once knew. This was a man who had lost his power, and now, he had no choice but to acknowledge the one person who could turn everything around. "I think it's time for me to step down," he said finally, his voice soft. "I can't do this anymore. I was wrong. I see now what you were capable of. You were always the one who had the vision. I should have seen it earlier." I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to relish in the fact that I had been right all along. But another part of me felt indifference. His apology didn't mean anything to me anymore. It was just words. I had already proven myself, and that was more important than any apology. "I appreciate you stepping down," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But don't think for a second that this means we're done. The real work is just beginning. You had your chance, Jason. And you failed." He nodded, his face a mask of defeat. There was no rebuttal, no argument. He knew the truth now. He had tried to run a company with empty promises and a lack of direction. Meanwhile, I had come in with a plan, and that plan had turned everything around. I offered him a severance package, not because I felt guilty, but because I knew it was the right thing to do. He had been the one who gave me a chance to show my worth, even if he didn't realize it at the time. I wasn't going to deny him the financial stability he needed. But emotionally, he was on his own. I had moved on. Jason took the offer with quiet acceptance, not fighting me anymore. As he left my office for the final time, I felt a sense of closure. There was no more animosity. No more bitterness. I had done what I came to do, and now it was time for him to fade into the background of my story. I was now the one in charge. Not just of the company, but of my future. And no one could take that away from me. The next chapter had already begun, and I was ready to write it. With Jason stepping down and the company now firmly under my control, everything started to feel like it was falling into place. I had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, fighting for recognition, and trying to prove my worth. Now, I was at the top, and there was no turning back. But even though I had achieved professional success, there was still a lingering feeling of unfinished business. It wasn't about Jason anymore. It wasn't about the company, either. It was about something deeper, the emotional toll that his betrayal had taken on me. All those years of loyalty, hard work, and dedication had been thrown aside without warning. Now, the power was mine. And I was going to make sure I didn't let it slip away. I focused on expanding the business, bringing in new clients, and building relationships that would ensure its longevity. The foundation I had set was rock solid, and I knew I was ready to take it to the next level. The only problem was that I couldn't shake the nagging thought of revenge. I wasn't seeking revenge out of spite, but out of a desire for justice. Jason had wronged me, and the company had misjudged me. They had underestimated my resilience, and now, I had the chance to show them just how wrong they were. I had already won professionally, but what about on a personal level? What about on a moral level? I decided to make my move. It wasn't enough for me to just keep moving forward. I needed to remind everyone, especially Jason, that I was in control. The decision I made wasn't about the company anymore. It was about proving a point. I would restructure the company even further, focusing on the areas that had been neglected, the areas that had allowed Jason and his incompetence to thrive. I started by calling an all-hands meeting. My team, now fully committed and working under the new structure, gathered in the conference room. They had bought into my vision, and it was time for them to see the final phase of my plan. I stood at the front, a sense of calm confidence radiating from me. My voice was steady as I spoke, but every word carried the weight of everything I had been through. Today, we take this company to the next level. We've proven what we're capable of, but we're not stopping here. I've spent years working in this industry, and I've seen the mistakes that others have made. I've learned from them, and I've learned how to turn those mistakes into opportunities. As I spoke, I could see the eyes of my team, my real team, lighting up with inspiration. They saw what I saw, a chance to grow. But I wasn't just speaking to them. I was speaking to everyone who had doubted me. I was speaking to Jason, too. The man who had been too proud to see my worth. The next day, I called a meeting with Jason. It wasn't about making him feel guilty anymore. It was about giving him one final reminder of the mistake he had made, one last piece of my revenge. I wanted him to know that it wasn't just about the company's collapse or his failure to lead, it was about how I had succeeded despite his efforts to hold me back. We met in my office, and the moment he walked in, I could tell he was nervous. He sat down in front of my desk, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "I know you're disappointed in me," he said, his voice low. "And I know I can't make up for what I did. But I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, that I'm sorry." I listened quietly. The apology wasn't for me. It was for him. I didn't need his forgiveness or his regrets. But I knew it was important for him to say it, to admit the truth. "It's too late, Jason," I said calmly, meeting his eyes. "But thank you for saying that. I don't need you to apologize. I just need you to remember this: you made a choice, and I made mine. I'm not the same man you let go. I've rebuilt myself, and now I'm in control." There was a long pause as Jason looked at me, the realization of his failure settling in. "I've made my peace with it," I added, rising from my seat. "Now, it's your turn to do the same." He nodded slowly, his face a mixture of regret and acceptance. He knew the truth now: there was no place for him in this company, not anymore. I had taken over, and I had succeeded. As Jason left my office for the last time, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I had hurt him, but because I had proven something to myself. I had taken everything he had tried to take away from me, and I had built something stronger. I wasn't just the survivor of a betrayal. I was the architect of my future. And that was the greatest revenge of all. As the months passed, the company continued to grow, thriving in ways I hadn't even imagined when I first stepped into the role of leader. The power dynamics had shifted permanently, and my reputation as a business leader began to cement itself. But even with all the success, a strange feeling lingered, one that I hadn't anticipated. I had done everything I set out to do. I had taken the company from the brink of collapse to new heights. I had turned the tables. But was I done? Was this truly the end of my story? Or was there more I could accomplish? Despite my accomplishments, I couldn't help but think about the larger picture. My relationship with Jason, the man who had fired me without reason, still weighed on my mind. I had gotten my revenge, and then some. He had watched as I built my empire, only to be left standing in the rubble of his failed leadership. But I realized that revenge wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about showing myself what I was truly capable of. The idea of the next step began to take shape. I wasn't just going to stop here. I had built more than a business, I had created a legacy. It was time to push the boundaries even further, to become the person I had always been destined to be. I decided to take the company public. I wanted to show the world that what I had achieved wasn't just a fluke, it wasn't just about one man's personal growth, it was about the vision and hard work that had been put into the reconstruction of an entire industry. I wanted to prove that success could rise from failure, and I was the living proof of it. The process of going public was grueling. There were endless meetings with investors, preparing for the IPO, and negotiating contracts that would set the company up for a long and prosperous future. But I was prepared. I had been building toward this moment my entire career, and now, it was finally within reach. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as I was about to sign the final papers for the IPO, I received another message from Jason. It was another apology, another request for forgiveness. He asked if we could meet one last time. This time, I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what I needed to do. We met at the same cafe where we had talked months ago. Jason looked different, the weight of the world seemed to be on his shoulders, and it was clear that the toll of his decisions had worn him down. He had spent the last few months trying to rebuild his career, but it was obvious that he wasn't doing it on his own terms. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Jason said quietly, as we sat across from each other. "But I want you to know that I've learned so much from everything that's happened. I regret how I treated you, and I've been working to rebuild myself. I'll never be the man I was before, but I just wanted to say, thank you." I listened, but I didn't speak immediately. Part of me wanted to take satisfaction in watching him squirm, in seeing him come to terms with his failure. But as I sat there, looking at the man who had tried to break me, I realized that my revenge had already been served. I didn't need to rub it in. "I've already moved on," I said finally, my voice calm. "You made your mistakes, and I made mine. But I've learned that holding on to that pain only keeps us stuck. I've built my life, and now, I'm building my legacy." Jason nodded, tears welling in his eyes, but he didn't say anything else. He knew the truth. He knew that I was beyond his reach. I left the cafe with a sense of finality. I didn't need to keep proving anything to anyone. My story was no longer about revenge, it was about rebuilding my future. It was about showing the world that, even after the darkest moments, we can rise again, stronger, better, and unbreakable. The IPO went through without a hitch. My company became one of the most talked about names in the industry, and my reputation continued to grow. But more than anything, I realized that success is the best revenge, and it was something no one could ever take away from me. As I stood at the top of my building, looking out over the city I had conquered, I realized that this wasn't just about what I had built. It was about the man I had become. A man who had been brought to his knees, but had risen higher than anyone could have imagined. And that was all I needed to know. It was a crisp morning when I stood on the rooftop of my office building, overlooking the city that had been my battleground for so long. The skyline was bathed in golden light, and the hum of traffic below was a constant reminder that the world was always moving, always changing. And I, too, had changed. I had gone from the man who was dismissed without reason to the one standing here, a man who had rebuilt everything from nothing. The IPO had been a massive success, and my company was now one of the top players in the industry. The investors, the employees, and the clients had all recognized the strength of my vision. But this success wasn't just about business. It was about revenge, sweet, satisfying revenge against those who had underestimated me. Jason, and everyone else who had wronged me, thought they could simply push me aside and watch me crumble. But instead, they had unwittingly fueled my determination. The same people who had doubted me were now watching from the sidelines as I took the reins of a thriving empire. I had become the person they never imagined I could be. But even with all the success, the true victory was internal. It wasn't about the wealth or the recognition. It was about something deeper, something more profound. I had finally proven my worth to myself. The moment I realized this came one afternoon, when I was sitting in my office, looking at the walls that were now covered with awards, accolades, and framed thank you notes from clients. It hit me, I had built something that wasn't just a company, it was a legacy. But my satisfaction wasn't just about revenge. It was about self-respect. I had found strength in the darkest moments of my life, and I had used that strength to push forward, despite the odds. I wasn't the man who had been discarded anymore. I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one in control, the one with the power to shape my destiny. I reached out to my team, the group of people who had stood by me and supported me as I navigated through the toughest moments of my life. They were the reason I had been able to accomplish everything I had. I didn't need Jason's approval, or anyone else's, but it felt good to know that I had built something with the right people. "We've come a long way," I said to them, standing in front of a room full of employees who believed in me and the vision I had shared. "This company is more than just a business. It's a testament to what we can accomplish when we believe in each other. We've proven that we are unstoppable." As I spoke, I realized that my revenge had turned into something much more powerful, a purpose. I wasn't driven by hatred or resentment anymore. I was driven by the desire to succeed. To succeed for myself. To succeed for the people who had supported me. To prove that no matter what the world threw at me, I would keep fighting. Later that evening, I received a call from Lena, the woman who had once told me I'd fail. The same person who had questioned my abilities and dismissed me when I needed support the most. I wasn't sure what she wanted, but I knew one thing: this was the final chapter of the story. She apologized for everything, saying that she was proud of me. But I wasn't interested in reconciliation anymore. I had already moved on, and the old wounds had healed. "I'm happy for you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But my focus is on the future now, not the past." And with that, I hung up. I had finally let go. I had won. I had taken everything that was meant to break me and turned it into something greater than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just the man who had been fired, humiliated, and betrayed. I was the man who had built his future, who had proven that nothing and no one could define him. I had taken the worst moment of my life and turned it into my greatest triumph. As I stood on the rooftop that night, looking at the stars above, I realized that the true victory wasn't about revenge at all. It was about becoming the person I was always meant to be. The person I am today.